So we're going to dive right in here on how to create your first ads. Last webinar, we talked about how to create your first campaign properly. We talked about extensions and search term maintenance, but we really wanted to spend an entire webinar just on ad creation alone. So in this section here in your dashboard, you will hover under ads and extensions and then click on ads and simply click one of these blue plus signs and to create your first ad. And we're going to cover today 3 different types of ads: your text ad, your responsive search ad, and your dynamic search ad. Your call ad is pretty self-explanatory. It is an ad that shows your phone number. It'll also show your URL and a headline of your company name, but when they click the ad, it'll call your company. So today we're going to talk about text ads, responsive search ads, and dynamic search ads. Hopping right into text ad. You'll pick your campaign and ad group that you want that ad to go into, and this is where you create it. All right, you put your final URL. This just means the landing page that you want the searcher to go to. They've clicked on your ad. Where are they going? This is the URL that you want to use here. You can use a page on your website, or if you're not using your website for your ads, if you're using a landing page such as Instapage or Unbounce, if you're utilizing that strategy, then you put the URL here. But this is simply where you want the user to go to once they click on your ad. You have a few different headlines you can put here. Headline 1, headline 2, and a while back they added an option for headline 3. It doesn't always show, but this is where you put headline 3. Over here is your preview. So where headline 1 is, headline 2, headline 3. This is their display URL, where they're going. So where they're going is this final URL, but the display URL is the actual URL that they'll see. So if you don't want them to see this stuff coming off the end, if it's a really long URL, you can just make it prettier in the display URL. So then you will create your descriptions. You have 90 characters to create description 1, and you have 90 characters to create description 2. And over here, we'll again show you where those descriptions go. So the difference between a text ad and those other ads that we're going to go into is control. This is manual. You have control over what the user is going to see. You choose what they're going to see for the headline. You choose what they're going to see for descriptions. And you can view that on mobile or desktop. This is what your ad is going to look like on desktop. This is what it's going to look like on mobile. If you're wondering what these are here, as covered in our last webinar, there are a couple extensions. You got a call extension here. You can see site link extensions. There's more extensions here, but we covered that in our first webinar. This part here in the white is your actual text ad. It is very, very important to note, vital, please do this. Once you create one ad, copy it and create a second. It's as easy as switching out headlines. Headline 2 for headline 1. Just switch those around. The same thing with descriptions. So if you've saved your ad, copy that ad and create a new one. All this stuff will populate and you'll just switch it around, and 2 things will happen. You now have 2 ads to A/B test, because maybe the ad with headline 1 works better than headline 2 when it's switched the other way around. Maybe it doesn't, but now you know. The other thing that's going to happen is that your campaigns will automatically perform better. How does this make sense? Any Google representative will tell you this is how the algorithm works. If you only give them one ad to work off of, your campaign is not going to do as well as it could if you had at least 2 that look fairly similar with just the headlines and descriptions switched around. Now, I would suggest really spending time and making several quality ads. Switch those headlines and descriptions around to A/B test those results. It's really, still based on budget. If you're doing 1,000 ads at a really small budget, you really want to go in with a purpose and a strategy. But in the very, very minimum, you want to have at least 2 ads for the algorithm to work off of. So that is your text ads. If you have any questions, please leave them in the Q&A chat box. And our next ad that we're going to cover is the responsive search ad. So again, we're selecting our campaign and ad group. So what's different from the responsive search ad to the text ad is control. Whereas the text ad, you decide what the searcher is seeing. Your responsive search ad, you are giving Google all these different types of headlines, So a different headline here and different descriptions. You can give them a ton of different headlines and descriptions to use, but Google will decide which headlines to show, which descriptions to show for the searcher. So that's where you don't have control. You're giving them a ton of different examples and they're going to decide which ones to show. You can again see what some of those might look like on mobile or on desktop with different examples. And there's a fun little add strength widget at the top here that'll show you, hey, you need to add more headlines or include popular keywords in your headlines. Maybe they need to be more unique. Maybe your descriptions need to be more unique. As you fill more and more of these out, these little green circles will fill up. They'll have a check mark. You'll go from poor to great. It's a great, helpful, simple tool, but please keep in mind quality. Don't just put in a million different headlines that don't have any strategy behind them. You want this to make sense to the searcher. So include as many headlines and descriptions that you can that make sense. A good strategy to use here is simply go to your website or recall the most frequent conversations that you have with your customers or clients. What are the most frequent questions that they ask? What's the verbiage that's used? Because 9 times out of 10, those will be the searches that are happening on Google. So you want to capture those kind of searches. You want to have that verbiage within your headlines and descriptions, because if those customers are searching that on Google and they're already reading it within your ad, they're more likely to click on it. So really have a strategy to go into when you're providing all the different headlines and descriptions. And last but not least, we'll go ahead and create a dynamic search ad. This one is going to be much different than the others. Oh, and I have to go here. This, you have only provided your website, which you did when you built your campaign. The only thing that you can do here is put in a couple descriptions of your company. Right in this box, you will explain. Just little examples there. But Google will decide where they are sending the searcher. So that final URL, that landing page on your website that they've already scraped, they're going to decide where on your website they're sending the searcher. They're going to scrape your website to come up with what headline they want to show the searcher, and then what that URL is going to look like. Again, we talked about display URL versus final URL, and that's what that ad looks like over here on desktop and on mobile. This is the only thing you have control over is the descriptions. Everything else they've scraped from your website, so you're giving them almost full control over that. So if you're asking yourself, which ones should I create? I suggest creating all of them and taking that data and analyzing what's working best for you. Sometimes you'll see that all of them are working great, so keep them all on, but you always want to try it before you decide if something's going to work for you or not. If you try responsive and it's not working for you, and you're sure that you've utilized every strategy that makes sense and it's still not working, then you can get out of the responsive ads, but keep your text ads and your dynamic search ads running if those are doing well. But don't be afraid to try all 3 of those. So what's interesting is you'll know with your text ads how to analyze if those are doing great, right? You can see people clicking on them, if it's converting and things like that. And your responsive should be the same thing. You know, if you are converting well, just keep that going. If you're not, maybe switch around the headlines or the descriptions and see how you can work that out. But what can you do in a dynamic search ad to maintain that in a healthy way? When you start getting your dynamic search ads, once the data starts coming in, you'll go into that ad group and you'll look at the data based on where Google is sending your customers and clients. So for example, one of my clients, their dynamic search ads was spending the most money out of all the ads. It was bringing in the most money, but it had a high cost per conversion. So I went into the dynamic search ads and I looked at all the different URLs that Google was sending our customers to. 3 out of 7 of those landing pages on their website were spending the most, but not converting at a good cost per conversion. Or they were just bleeding on those. The other 4 were doing fine. So I paused those 3 landing pages. So this is where you have a little control. After you start running dynamic search ads, you can then say, hey, I don't want these ads to show on these landing pages, so you can remove those from the dynamic search ads. Once we did that, we paused 3 URLs in the dynamic search ads, and they only showed on the other 4, or they were only sent to the other 4 landing pages on the website. The cost per conversion lowered within the first 2 weeks by $25. So if you imagine you have like a $100 cost per conversion with an average order of $250, that lowers down to $75. That's a really, really high jump. So you'll see fairly immediate results if that's the case for you. If you're seeing a bleed on half of your landing pages in dynamic, just pause those and keep the other ones running, and you should see fairly immediate results within the first week or so, but always give at least 30 days worth of data to get a real good window of data for that. So that covers all 3. Text ads, again, are your manual ads that you can control what headlines show, descriptions, and website URL. Your responsive search ad, that's giving examples to Google of different headlines and descriptions, and they'll decide which of the ones that you provided that they'll show. And your dynamic search ad, Google has your website, you've given them a couple descriptions, they're going to decide everything else, what to show them, where to send them on your website. But again, after you've got some data from that, you can decide if where they're sending your customers is working out for you. So you do have a little control with that after the data comes in. So that covers all 3 of those. And from here, we will jump into the Q&A.